Mama, I'm not going to church anymore. He taught me how to be stronger than God. That's what my son said to me. Calm, as if he were talking about the weather. And just like that, something in the room cracked. I was standing in the kitchen, one hand holding a rosary that had already broken once before, back when he was in the hospital. The beads slipped through my fingers, tapping the wooden floor one by one, tiny, sharp sounds, like bullets that didn't miss. Outside, the Sunday bells were ringing. Inside, the air felt thick, like someone had turned the world off for a second. The stew on the stove had gone cold, and the smell of burnt candle wax clung to my hair. I looked at him. Elijah. My only boy. He was taller now, stronger in the shoulders, but there was nothing behind his eyes. Just still water. Not the boy who once sang in the church choir, not the boy who used to press his palms together at bedtime whispering, "Keep Mama safe, Lord." No. This man standing before me had a different light in his face, a colder one. "What did you just say, baby?" I asked, though my voice came out like someone else's. He didn't blink. "You heard me," he said. "Reverend Cain showed me the truth. God doesn't save the weak, Mama. He leaves them begging." The spoon slipped from my hand, clanging against the pot. My knees almost gave way. For a moment I thought I was hearing echoes, some trick of the mind. But then he smiled. Not cruel, not even angry, just sure, and that was what frightened me most. The calm. The last time I saw that calm on his face was when he was 12, lying in the hospital, doctors saying he might not make it through the night. I had dropped to the floor back then, clutching the same rosary, whispering, "Take me instead." Now, standing in the same kitchen 10 years later, I realized that prayer had been answered in a way I never understood. Maybe God had taken something from me that night. Maybe he'd left me with a shell that looked like my son. "Elijah," I said softly, trying not to cry, "you don't mean that. Reverend Cain is. He's just—" He cut me off with a look. "He's the only one who ever listened, Mama. While you were too busy praying, he was teaching." I wanted to reach for him, to pull him close like when he was little, when the world could still be fixed with soup and a hymn. But I couldn't move. The space between us had grown into something wide and dark, something holy once, now hollow. The radio in the corner buzzed with static, the choir from St. Mary's barely audible under the interference. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. And all I could think was how strange it was that grace could sound so far away, even when you'd built your life around it. He turned to leave. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To the service," he said. "Not yours, his." He walked out before I could say another word. The door closed, and the bells outside faded into nothing. I stood there alone, the house echoing with quiet. That's when I saw the rosary beads scattered on the floor, 13 of them missing, the cross cracked in two. I knelt down, pressing the pieces into my palm until I felt the sting of metal against skin. My blood left small red dots on the white tile. And I remember thinking, it's not the first time this cross has tasted my blood. I picked up the broken chain, staring at it under the dull light of the kitchen. I'd prayed on those same beads the night Elijah nearly died. I'd promised everything I had to save him. But as I held them now, cold, lifeless, slick with my own sweat, I felt the truth slide in like a blade. I once begged God to save my son from death, but maybe that was the night I invited the devil in instead. People say a mother's prayer can move mountains. I used to believe that. It was the summer of 2015 when the world split open for me. Elijah was 19, wild and restless, the kind of boy who thought the road would always curve before the crash. One night, it didn't. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. A number I still remember like a scar. They said, "Your son's been in an accident." That was all. By the time I reached St. Hugh, Luke's hospital, his body was full of tubes and machines that breathed for him. I fell to my knees right there in the hallway. The smell of disinfectant stung my nose. The floor was cold under my palms. Above the nurse's station hung a statue of the Virgin Mary, pale and silent. I stared at her face until my eyes burned. I whispered, "Take me instead. Take my breath, my body, anything, just let him live." And I stayed there. 7 hours. The nurses begged me to rest. Reverend Thomas tried to pull me up, but my knees had already locked. I wasn't praying anymore. I was bargaining. When dawn came, Elijah's heartbeat steadied. The doctor called it a miracle. I called it a contract. After that, I sold everything that didn't breathe. My little restoration workshop. Heaven's touch. Atelier, where I used to fix chipped angel statues for local churches. Gone. The brushes, the gold leaf, even the small radio that played hymns while I worked. All sold to pay hospital bills that came in envelopes thick as sin. For a while, I cleaned the pews at St. Mary's. Polished brass, scrubbed candle wax from marble floors. People would smile at me as they passed, not knowing every stain I wiped off the altar felt like erasing another piece of myself. But I didn't mind. I told myself I'd promised my soul, and souls don't complain. Every night, when Elijah was finally home, I'd sit beside his bed with the rosary. The string had snapped during the first week of his coma, beads scattered across the hospital floor like pearls from a broken necklace. I crawled on my hands and knees, picking each one up, whispering a word for every bead I found. Hope, mercy, grace. When I reached the last bead, I whispered, "Mine," because I knew I'd given everything else away. Back then, Elijah was still gentle. He'd wake to the sound of my humming and smile without opening his eyes. Sometimes he'd say, "Sing the one about the river again, Mama." And I'd hum. Amazing Grace, slow and shaky, until both of us forgot how close we'd come to losing each other. I still remember that Christmas. He was strong enough to walk again, wrapped in a second-hand coat 2 sizes too big. The church was crowded, candles glowing like little suns. When the choir began, I stepped forward to sing, and from the front pew Elijah lifted his hand, following every note, mouthing each word. For one perfect moment, everything was whole. Every bead on the rosary meant gratitude, not desperation. Every prayer was thank you, not please. If I'd known how short that piece would be, I would have held the note longer. That was when Reverend Kane came to town. He was new, younger than the rest, with a smile that knew how to disarm a crowd. People called him the fire preacher, because his sermons made you feel the floor shake under your feet. The first time I met him, he shook my hand and said, "Sister Clarice, I've heard about your faith. 7 hours on your knees, that's devotion the Lord won't forget." I wanted to believe him. He'd visit the sick, hold prayer circles late into the night. He had this way of making people think he saw straight through them, right into their pain. One afternoon, he came to see Elijah. The boy was sitting on the porch, quiet, staring at the scars on his arm where the glass had cut him. Cain placed a hand on his head and closed his eyes like he was receiving a message only he could hear. Then he said, softly, "This one's chosen, Sister Clarice." Sometimes, God sends a little darkness to help a soul recognize the light. It sounded poetic then. I remember smiling, relieved that someone finally spoke words that felt bigger than my fear. But later, when the darkness grew, teeth, those same words would come back to haunt me. After Cain's visits, Elijah changed little by little. He read the Bible less, and Cain's pamphlets more. He started talking about energy and strength instead of grace and patience. He'd ask strange questions. What if the devil's just God's favorite student? I'd laugh it off, thinking it was teenage philosophy. But some nights I'd wake to the sound of him whispering in his room, low and rhythmic, like prayer turned inside out. I'd stand at his door, hand pressed against the wood, listening. Sometimes I thought I heard another voice whisper back. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe not. Still, I told myself not to worry. He was alive. He was home. And hadn't I promised to give up my soul for that? I remember one night, I dreamed of the hospital floor again. The same marble tiles, the same cold air. Only this time, the Virgin Mary was gone. In her place stood a man with Cain's eyes, holding my rosary between his fingers. He smiled and said, "You offered your soul, sister. I just came to collect the interest." I woke up drenched in sweat, my hands clutching the real rosary. 13 beads were missing again. I kept that dream to myself. In the daylight, life went on. Morning mass, cleaning jobs, soup simmering on the stove. But under the surface, something was shifting. In Elijah, in me, maybe in the walls of that house. The prayers sounded thinner. The candles burned faster. And when Reverend Cain started preaching that fear is just another form of faith, the congregation cheered. Only, I felt my stomach twist. Because I knew fear, and it didn't feel like faith. It felt like the shadow of a promise I'd made long ago, finally coming back to collect. The first thing I noticed was the candles. Elijah used to hate the smell of wax. It gave him headaches when he was little, but suddenly he started burning them in his room. Not the white ones from the church. These were black, thick, and smoked like tar. At first, I thought he was trying to pray in his own way. I told myself, don't judge. The boy's been through enough. But after a week, the house began to smell like something rotten had been mixed with incense. He stopped sleeping too. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and see the light under his door still on, flickering. Once I peeked in. He sat at his desk, shirtless, the air heavy with candle soot. On the wall, he'd drawn symbols, loops, circles, words in Latin. I couldn't read. His lips moved fast, whispering. I heard my name. Then I heard, "Mother will understand." I should have walked in. Should have stopped him right there. But I froze. Something about the way he whispered. It wasn't prayer. It was like listening to a man answer a voice only he could hear. When he noticed me standing there, he turned and smiled. "Go back to bed, Mama," he said. "I'm learning how to keep you safe." His tone was soft, tender even, but his eyes, they looked like two pieces of night sky without stars. The next morning, I asked him about the drawings. He laughed. "It's nothing, just something Reverend Cain taught us in the youth circle. He says every believer has a shadow side, and if we talk to it, it can't hurt us." I wanted to believe that. But there was something wrong with the way he said, "us." Like there were more people in the room than just him and me. That afternoon, I took the bus to the church. Cain was in the courtyard, watering the small patch of roses by the gate. He smiled when he saw me. "Ah, Sister Clarice, always a light in the garden." "Reverend," I said, "I need to talk to you about Elijah." He set the watering can down, wiped his hands slowly, and nodded toward a bench. "Of course. What troubles you?" "He's been acting strange. He doesn't sleep. He burns black candles. He keeps saying things I don't understand." My voice trembled more than I wanted. Cain listened with his eyes half closed, like he was already somewhere above me. Finally he said, "Don't be afraid. Your son is learning to speak with his inner darkness. God made both light and shadow. We can't reject one without rejecting the other." "That doesn't sound like the God I know," I whispered. He leaned closer. "The God you know kept your boy dying in a hospital bed." Numb, the darkness brought him back. Sometimes, the Lord hides inside the very thing we fear. For a moment, I didn't breathe. Because deep down, a part of me wondered if he was right. Hadn't I begged the night itself to spare Elijah? Hadn't I traded something holy for his heartbeat? But then he smiled, and that doubt felt like sin. So I forced myself to nod and said, "If it's God's will, I'll try to understand." That night, I lay awake listening. The house creaked. The candles in his room hissed and sputtered. Through the thin wall, I heard his voice again, low and measured. "Mother will understand. When I become strong, she'll rest." I pressed my pillow against my face to muffle the sound, but the words crawled through anyway. There was something different in his tone now. Less human, more like a chorus of two voices speaking as one. The next morning, I found a dead bird on the porch. Its wings were spread neatly, almost arranged, like an offering. A piece of black thread was tied around its neck. I picked it up with shaking hands and saw something shiny inside its beak. A bead from my rosary. That was when I knew something had turned. Whatever Elijah was learning, it wasn't coming from God. I went back to the church the following Sunday. Cain was preaching about liberation from fear, his voice booming, sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked radiant, powerful. The The congregation swayed with every word. When our eyes met, he smiled again, same smile as always, but I couldn't stay for the final hymn. I slipped out the back and stood in the empty garden. The roses had withered, petals black at the edges. I whispered, "Lord, if you can hear me, tell me what to do." No wind, no whisper, no sign, only the hum of the fluorescent light above the door. For the first time in my life, I felt like my prayers were being swallowed before they reached heaven. When I got home, Elijah was waiting on the porch, barefoot. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. He said, "I talked to him today, Mama. Reverend Kane says I'm almost ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. He smiled. "To finish what you started when you begged for my life." The world tilted a little. "Baby, what do you mean?" But he just touched my cheek and said, "You'll see soon. You'll be proud." He walked inside before I could stop him. I stood there until the streetlights came on, the bead from the dead bird still in my pocket, warm against my skin. And for the first time since the day of the accident, I didn't pray. Because praying means you expect someone to answer. And that night, I already knew. That was the first time I ever called God's name, and heard nothing back. It happened on a Thursday night, just past midnight. The house was too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't rest, it waits. I'd gone to bed early, pretending not to hear Elijah pacing, but when the floorboards creaked above my room again and again, something inside me snapped. I climbed the stairs barefoot, heart thudding, every step heavier than the last. His door was open. The candles were still burning, the same black ones, wax dripping down the dresser like melted tar. The air stank of smoke and metal. And there it was. The statue of Saint Michael I'd restored years ago for the church, the one I'd brought home when the altar was replaced. It stood on Elijah's desk, or rather half of it did. The head was gone. I searched the floor, the shelves, the trash bin. Nothing. Then I saw it. In the corner, half buried in the soil of his potted plant, was the head of the saint. I froze. The candlelight flickered across its face, the stone eyes stared back at me through dirt. And on the wall, written in black marker above his bed, were the words, "Faith is a prison. Cain set me free." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just what he'd written. It was how neat it looked, like scripture, like he'd replaced one gospel with another. I sank to my knees. My hands found the broken rosary on his nightstand, the one I hadn't touched since that first night in the hospital. The string was frayed, a few beads missing, the cross bent. Something inside me cracked open. I don't remember the first tear. Only the sound. Soft, almost polite, like it didn't want to interrupt the silence. Then came the shaking, the sobs that wouldn't stop. "Elijah," I whispered, "what have they done to you?" But there was no answer, only the hiss of wax dripping onto the floor. I sat there until the candles burned themselves out. When the room finally went dark, I took the rosary and carried it downstairs. At the kitchen table, I found a needle, a spool of thread, and a small lamp. My hands trembled as I threaded the needle. The thread slipped twice before I got it through. I began restringing the beads one by one. Each one had a different temperature, some warm from my hand, some cold as marble. As I pulled the thread through, the needle bit into my finger, drawing a thin line of blood. The drop fell onto the tablecloth, bright red against white. I didn't wipe it away. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking. The sky outside was the color of old bruises. I looked at what I'd made. Not a rosary anymore, but something rough, crooked, trembling. Still, I held it up to the light. "If the devil wants my boy," I whispered, "he'll have to walk through me first." I pressed the rosary to my chest. The cross left an imprint on my skin. Then I said it out loud, steady this time. "If my son believes the devil can save him, then I'll learn to face the devil myself." By noon, I'd made up my mind. I walked to the bank and withdrew every cent I had left in savings. The teller asked if I wanted it in cash or check. "Cash," I said, "all of it." She looked worried. "Like, is everything all right, Mrs. Bowen?" I smiled too calmly. Everything's finally right. I didn't tell her that I was on my way to the man who'd stolen my son's soul. The heat outside felt heavier than usual. The bus ride to the church stretched on forever. Each stop, I told myself to get off, to go home, to pray instead. But praying had done nothing. It was time to act. When I reached the church, the doors were locked. Kane's car was parked in the back, the shiny black one with the license plate that read, Grace. I waited by the side door, the one near the choir hall. He came out 10 minutes later, surprised to see me. Mrs. Bowen, he said, adjusting his collar. You should have called. I held up the rosary, the one stitched back together with blood on the thread. Did you tell my son to do this? I asked, my voice barely steady. He glanced at it and smiled faintly. Sometimes things must be broken before they can be whole again. Then why did he break St. Michael's head off? Why is he burning black candles? Writing your name like a prayer? Kane's smile didn't move his eyes. Sister, the boy's awakening. You of all people should be proud. Your faith is the seed. I'm just helping it grow. I stepped closer. You're not growing faith. You're poisoning it. His voice dropped to a whisper. And yet you came to me for salvation once, didn't you? 7 hours on your knees, begging. Maybe you invited something that answered quicker than God. The world tilted again. For a moment I saw it in his face, something dark, glimmering behind his calm. Leave my son alone, I said. He chuckled, low and sure. Your son isn't mine to leave. He came willingly. You gave him to me the moment you surrendered your faith for a miracle. I don't remember grabbing the bucket of holy water near the door. All I know is that I threw it at him, every drop splashing across his collar, his chest, his face. He didn't flinch. He only wiped the water from his cheek and said, almost tenderly, Water won't save him now. You'd better pray the fire does. Then he walked past me, leaving a trail of wet footprints that steamed faintly in the afternoon sun. I stood there for a long time, the empty bucket in my hands. Outside, the bells began to ring for evening mass. My knees wanted to buckle, but I refused. For the first time in years, I wasn't begging, pleading, or praying. I was planning. Whatever this man had started in my house, I was going to end it. No more candles. No more whispered sermons. No more silence from heaven. If God wouldn't speak, then I'd raise my own voice loud enough for him to hear. The church looked different at night. No sunlight through the stained glass. No music. No warmth. Just shadows stretched long across the pews. A single candle burned on the altar, flickering like a pulse. I pushed the door open, and the sound echoed all the way down the nave. Inside, Reverend Kane was standing before a small group of young men and women, my son among them. They all wore black, their heads bowed, murmuring words that weren't any prayer I'd ever heard. Elijah stood closest to the pulpit, his hands clasped behind his back. There was a calm on his face that made my stomach twist, the same calm he'd had when he told me he was done with God. Kane turned toward me, his smile soft and patient, like he'd been expecting me. Sister Clarice, he said, you've come at the perfect time. We were just beginning the lesson. My voice came out sharper than I planned. Lesson? You call this a lesson? You've been poisoning them. He raised an eyebrow, amused. Poisoning? No, my dear, purifying. Teaching them to confront their fear. I took a step closer, my heels clicking on the tile. Don't lie to me. You've been teaching them that fear is stronger than faith. You've been feeding them your darkness and calling it salvation. The group shifted uncomfortably. One girl looked down at the floor. Another crossed her arms. Kane smiled wider. You mistake me, sister. I only teach that fear is another face of faith. To fear something is to acknowledge its power. And to acknowledge power is the first step to worship. I could feel the blood rushing to my face. You're twisting God's word. You're teaching them to worship what breaks them. He took a slow step forward, his shoes whispering against the stone floor. And what if what breaks them is also what sets them free? Behind him, Elijah's lips moved. I could hear him whispering along with Kane's rhythm, a silent echo. I turned toward my son. Elijah, look at me. He didn't move. "Baby, please," I said, my voice trembling. "Whatever he's told you, it's not true. You don't have to follow him." Cain chuckled softly. "He's not following me, sister. He's walking his own path, the one you begged for when you prayed that night in the hospital." I froze. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "You remember, don't you? 7 hours on your knees, offering yourself. You called on anything that would listen. Well, something did." The room tilted. My breath caught. He leaned in, his words sliding like oil into my ear. "You prayed, and heaven stayed silent." I answered. "Tell me, sister, does that make me the devil, or just the only one who listened?" I slapped him before I realized my hand had moved. The sound cracked through the silence, sharp as lightning. For a moment, no one breathed. Cain touched his cheek and smiled. "Ah, so there's fire in you after all." He turned to the group, raising his hands. "You see, even she knows what I teach. Pain wakes faith." "Stop it!" I shouted. My voice echoed against the walls. I faced the others, my hands shaking. "He's lying to you. Look at what he's doing. He's turning you into slaves of your own fear." No one moved. Their eyes flickered toward Cain like children waiting for permission. He sighed, turning back to me. "You speak as if fear is evil. But tell me, Clarice, what drove you to your knees that night? Was it love or fear?" I swallowed hard. "Both." "Exactly," he said, smiling as if I'd proven his point. "Fear is sacred. It brought you closer to the divine. It gave you your son back." He walked toward Elijah and placed a hand on his shoulder. "And now, it's bringing him to me." "Elijah," I whispered, "please, you don't have to do this." He turned, finally meeting my eyes. For a split second, I saw my boy again, the one who used to sing "Amazing Grace" in the front pew. Then his gaze hardened. "Reverend Cain saved me, Mama." "You said God saved me, but he didn't. He left me dying. Cain gave me a reason to live." My chest tightened. "No, baby. God gave you breath. Cain just took the credit." Cain smiled faintly. "Let him speak, sister. He's right. I did what your faith couldn't. You did what no true man of God would dare." He stepped closer again, so close I could smell the faint trace of incense and smoke on his collar. "You begged this guy for help, but you were talking to the wrong side. That's not my fault, it's yours." He leaned in, voice low, almost tender. "You opened the door, Clarice. I just walked through it." Something inside me snapped. "You taught my son that God is weak?" I hissed. He tilted his head. "No, I taught him that fear is honest. And maybe, just maybe, that honesty is stronger than your faith." I lifted the rosary in my hand, the one stitched together with my own blood. "Fear doesn't save. Fear enslaves. And I won't let you make a prison out of my son." For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, irritation, maybe even doubt. But then he laughed softly, a sound too calm for the chaos around us. He turned to the group again, spreading his arms. "You all hear her?" The voice of the old world, chained by her faith, trembling before the truth. "This is why we must shed our weakness. This is why we rise." The others murmured, caught between awe and confusion. I took another step forward, my voice firm now. "You're not teaching them to rise. You're teaching them to kneel to you." His eyes sharpened. "Be careful, sister. I'm not your sister." For the first time, the smile slipped from his face. Elijah moved toward me. "Mama, please. Don't." "Don't what?" I said, turning to him. "Don't fight for you. Don't fight for what's left of us." He looked torn, his hands shaking. "He says you're the reason the darkness came." I felt the air leave my lungs. "What?" Cain's voice cut in smoothly. "Tell her, Elijah. Tell her how you heard her voice in your dreams, calling for any spirit that would save you." My knees almost gave. He'd twisted my prayer, turned my love into a curse. I looked at my son, my voice breaking. "Elijah, I did pray, but I prayed to God, not to him. Not to anything that would take you away from me." Cain's tone hardened. Lies. She prayed into the void, and I was the only one who answered. Without me, you'd be rotting underground. Something rose inside me. Not anger, not even fear, but a strength so clear it silenced every sound in the room. I met his eyes. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. Faith and fear are both powerful. But one gives life, and the other steals it. He frowned. And which am I? The thief. He smirked. Careful, Clarice. The thief always comes for what's valuable. I held up the rosary, the blood-dark thread gleaming under the candlelight. Then you'll find, this isn't yours to steal. I turned to Elijah, my voice trembling but strong. Baby, listen to me. Faith isn't a prison. It's a bridge. The only reason it hurts is because it's carrying you somewhere better. Don't burn it just because the crossing is hard. For the first time, he hesitated. His lips parted, but no words came out. Cain stepped in front of him, blocking my view. That's enough. He raised his hand like a conductor stopping a song. But before he could speak again, Elijah whispered behind him, Reverend, why did you tell me not to tell Mama about the rituals? Cain froze. The room shifted, his control cracked, just a little. You misunderstand, he said quickly. I was protecting her faith. I took a step closer. No, you were hiding the truth. Elijah's eyes darted between us, confusion flooding back into them. Cain's calm broke. He slammed his hand on the pulpit, his voice rising like thunder. Enough. She's blinded by her false god. She'll never understand. The young followers shrank back. And in that instant, under the trembling candlelight, I saw it. The fear behind his fury. Not holiness. Not conviction, just fear. I whispered almost to myself, so that's your faith. He turned, eyes blazing. What did you say? I met his gaze. Fear may be part of faith, but only when it bows to love. You let it bow to power, and that's why it will eat you alive. The candle sputtered, the flame shrinking to a thin blue glow. Elijah took a step back from him. Cain tried to reach out, but his hand shook. Don't listen to her, he hissed. She gave you to me. Elijah's voice cracked. No, she gave me life. The words hit the air like thunder. Cain's face twisted. Rage, disbelief, then silence. I felt tears burning my eyes, but my voice came clear, steady, final. In that moment, I understood. Faith is never lost. It's stolen. And tonight, I was taking mine back. After that night in the church, Cain didn't stop. He grew louder, bolder. More people came to hear him preach about fear reborn into freedom. They came in from the neighboring towns, mothers clutching children, men in pressed shirts, teenagers who wanted to be part of something that burned. And Cain gave them what they wanted: heat, spectacle, and a promise that sounded holy if you didn't listen too closely. He started hosting deliverance nights. The flyers said, "Be set free from weakness." They showed Elijah's picture. His eyes half closed, head bowed, hands raised toward Cain like a man receiving light. I saw them posted on grocery boards, gas station doors, even in front of St. Mary's where real prayer used to live. My stomach turned every time I passed one. I began to notice patterns. Every freed soul had a story to tell and a check to write. Cain claimed the money went to his restoration fund, to build homes for recovering addicts. But no homes ever appeared, just newer suits, bigger cars, and longer sermons. Elijah became his shining example. Cain called him the boy who conquered death and rose through fear. He'd put a hand on Elijah's shoulder, and the crowd would roar. And my son, my gentle boy, would smile like a man who didn't remember what his own hands had once created. At first, I tried to talk to him. He'd come home late, smelling of smoke and sweat, eyes glowing with a kind of fever. Baby, I'd say, you don't owe him your life. He'd answer softly, Mama, he gave it back to me. I just owe him my voice. Sometimes I'd hear him practicing that voice in his room, reciting Cain's words until they no longer sounded borrowed. That's when I started keeping records. It wasn't courage at first, it was survival. I bought a small recorder, the kind journalists use, and slipped it into my coat pocket when I went to his services. Cain's sermons always started gentle. He'd talk about forgiveness, about facing shadows, about embracing strength. Then his tone would shift, rising, sharp, electric. He'd shout things like, "Fear is your proof that God still watches you. Suffering is the rent you pay for divine power." And the people shouted back, "Amen." I'd sit in the last pew, clutching my rosary so tight, the beads cut into my skin. Each click of the recorder felt like a heartbeat. After the service, I'd go home and play it back. The sound filled my kitchen, their voices, their gasps, Cain's rhythm, and I'd feel the same cold creeping through the floorboards. One night, while cleaning the offering box after everyone had left, I found a folder in Cain's office drawer. Inside were photocopies of checks, names I recognized, amounts that made me dizzy. Beside each check was a photograph of the donor kneeling before Cain's altar. And at the top of the pile, Elijah. The photo showed him shirtless, eyes closed, Cain's palm on his forehead. In the background, you could see a camera tripod, red light blinking. My hands shook so badly, the folder slicked to the floor. That's when I realized what the blinking light meant. He was filming them, all of them, every so-called deliverance. I gathered what I could, photos, receipts, the recordings, and took them home. For 2 nights, I didn't sleep. I spread everything out across the kitchen table, the same table where Elijah once did his homework, the same table where we'd prayed for his recovery. There were dozens of faces, young people with tears on their cheeks, older ones clutching their chests, Cain's hand always somewhere in the frame like a signature. I knew half those kids' parents. They thought their children were finding faith. They didn't know they were paying for performance. When I called one mother, she burst into tears. Her daughter had donated her college fund. Another said Cain told her to cut ties with anyone who doubted her rebirth, which included her own family. I realized it wasn't just Elijah he'd taken. He was building an empire out of stolen belief. I needed proof no one could ignore. So I went back one more time. The night of the Great Renewal. That's what the posters called it. Cain had rented the city hall and turned it into a cathedral of smoke and sound. He promised a miracle of rebirth, and Elijah was the headline act. I dressed in black and sat near the back row, hidden in the crowd of hundreds. The stage was lit blood red, drums pounded slow and deep like a heart being summoned. Cain walked out in white robes, a gold cross glinting on his chest. "Tonight," he cried, "you will witness what happens when fear becomes faith." The crowd erupted. He motioned to the side curtain, and Elijah stepped out. My breath stopped. He looked radiant and empty at once. His eyes reflected the red lights, his face calm as stone. Cain raised his arms. "This is the boy who died," he shouted. "This is the child saved by the shadow." Elijah spread his hands, palms up. A camera panned across the stage, broadcasting the moment onto a giant screen above them. Cain placed his hand on Elijah's chest. "Elijah Bowen," he said, voice low, commanding. "Tonight, you will be reborn through fear. Do you surrender your past?" "I surrender," Elijah answered. "Do you trust me to lead you into light?" "I trust you." Every word landed like a knife in me. My fingers closed around the rosary. The beads dug into my skin until I felt the sting of blood. I didn't even notice I was whispering until the woman beside me looked up. "Lord," I breathed, "if you're still here, make this stop." Cain turned to the crowd, raising his voice until it filled the hall. Witness the transformation. 2 men brought out a basin medal, dark water shimmering under the lights. Cain gripped Elijah's shoulders. "He came from death once before," he said. "But tonight, he rises through fear itself." He pushed Elijah down into the basin, water sloshing over the sides. The crowd cheered. But I saw Elijah's hands, how they trembled, how they tried to push up. Cain pressed harder. My body moved before my mind could stop it. I stood, pushing past rows of stunned faces. "Stop," I screamed. "Stop this." Cain didn't even turn. He kept speaking, louder now, almost chanting. The old life dies. The new is born. I ran down the aisle. The guards at the front tried to block me, but I shoved through. The world blurred. Faces, lights, noise. By the time I reached the stage, Elijah's head was still under the water. I grabbed Kane's arm and yanked it back with everything in me. Water splashed across my dress as Elijah gasped, coughing, pulling himself free. The crowd fell silent. Kane turned, his smile frozen. "This is not your place, sister," he said. "You're interrupting God's work." I faced him, breathing hard. "Then let God defend it." I pulled the recorder from my pocket and pressed play. Kane's voice filled the hall, echoing from the speakers I'd tapped earlier in the control booth. "There is no God, only power, and I am the keeper of its door." Gasps rippled through the audience. The sound of his own blasphemy looped back at him over and over. Kane lunged toward me, but I stepped aside. Elijah rose to his feet, dripping, eyes wide with shock. He looked at Kane, then at me, then at the crowd. "She's telling the truth," he said hoarsely. He said the darkness was stronger than God. Murmurs turned into shouts. People began to back away, some crying, others pulling out their phones. Kane tried to speak, but the microphone squealed, feedback drowning his words. In the chaos, I saw the folder of checks fall from the pulpit, papers scattering like feathers. Elijah stumbled toward me, shivering. "Mama," he whispered, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I held him close, my dress soaked, my heart breaking and mending all at once. "It's all right, baby," I said. "You're home now." He cried into my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt his weight the way I used to, real, human, mine. Behind us, security lights flashed red and blue. Number 5. Someone had called the police. Officers stormed the hall, pushing through the crowd. Kane tried to run, but the doors at the back had already closed. I watched them take him away in handcuffs, his white robe stained with water and ash. Even then, he tried to smile. He turned his head toward me and said softly, "You prayed, Clarice." I just answered faster. I didn't reply. I just lifted my rosary, its beads streaked with blood and water, and whispered, "Then may heaven finally answer slower, but louder." The hall emptied slowly. I sat on the stage beside Elijah, both of us trembling. He looked at the basin, the dark water rippling under the lights. "Was it always like this, Mama?" he asked. "What?" "The devil pretending to be mercy." I looked at the broken cross around my neck, the thread dark with blood. "Yes," I said quietly, "but mercy has a longer memory." The camera lights still blinked red. Someone's live stream had captured everything, the confession, the confrontation, the truth. And as the screens above us replayed the moment of his words, I saw the faces of the people who had believed him. Their faith was breaking, but in the cracks, I saw light. I closed my hand around the rosary. The cut on my palm burned. That night, I realized some prayers don't save the dying. They save the living from worshiping the wrong savior. The hall was already pulsing when I arrived, lights hot, air thick with sweat and perfume. Hundreds of folding chairs had been set in perfect rows, and everyone was filled. Phones were lifted high, the stage lights washed everything in white and gold, as if the whole world had been dipped in sunlight that refused to bless. I'd been waiting in the back, near the exit, hidden under the same black coat I'd worn since the night of the renewal. Inside my pocket, the recorder was warm against my palm. I'd memorized every second of what it held. The line that would finally end him. Kane stood at the pulpit, microphone gleaming. His robe was pure white tonight, his voice smoother than silk. The crowd answered him like a choir that had forgotten its own hymn. "Tonight," he cried, "you will see a boy reborn. Not by weakness, not by begging, but by will." Applause broke like thunder. He gestured toward the side of the stage. Elijah stepped forward, dressed in the same white, barefoot, trembling under the lights. My heart clenched. He looked older, thinner, but I could still see the boy who once fell asleep in the pews while I rehearsed choir. Kane touched his shoulder. "This young man conquered death," he declared. "He is proof that fear, when faced, becomes freedom." Cameras panned. The live stream count flashed on a giant screen, 47,000 watching. He raised a hand. Let us witness his final passage. That was my moment. I moved before my courage had the chance to fade. My shoes clicked against the tile as I walked down the aisle. Some heads turned, someone whispered my name. Kane paused, smile tightening. Sister Clarice, he said through the microphone, voice honeyed with menace. Welcome back. Have you come to bless your son's rebirth? I climbed the steps, the stage lights stabbing my eyes. No, I said. I came to bury your lies. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The cameras swung toward me. Kane spread his arms, feigning patience. Friends, he said, the grieving mother returns. She cannot accept what God has done through me. I took another step forward, pulling the small speaker from my bag. My thumb pressed the play button. A voice burst through the sound system, his voice deeper, rawer, stripped of its Sunday smoothness. There is no God, only power, and I am the keeper of its door. The words echoed from wall to wall, bouncing off marble and glass. For heartbeat, no one moved. Then the murmurs began. Sharp, confused, swelling. Phones lifted higher. People whispered, "Did he just?" The screen behind us flickered, showing the live stream feed, his face frozen mid-smile while his own blasphemy poured through the speakers. Kane lunged toward the table where I'd set the recorder, but I held up the rosary, its thread dark with dried blood. Touch it, I said, my voice shaking but loud. Go on. Let's see which side answers you now. He stopped halfway, chest heaving. This woman is sick, he shouted to the crowd. She's lost in grief. Her son begged me to save him, begged. I did what her faith could not. I raised the rosary higher. The cross caught the light like a blade. Right, I said. I did beg. I begged the wrong man. But tonight, I'm taking my prayer back. Elijah covered his face, his knees buckled. I heard him sob. Kane's voice cracked. Don't listen to her lies. She forged this. She? The side doors burst open. Officers entered, flashing badges. One of them nodded toward the big screen. The live stream still rolling, thousands watching in real time. Kane tried to keep his composure. You can't arrest faith, he sneered. The officer replied. We can arrest fraud. The crowd split like water. People started shouting. Some at Kane, some at me, most at the confusion that filled the room. I stepped back toward Elijah. His tears had smeared the white paint on his cheeks. I took his hand. It was ice cold. He whispered, Mama, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I know, baby, I said. It's over now. Kane tried one last plea, his voice hoarse. Don't you see? He cried to the crowd. She's the reason the darkness came. Her fear called it forth. I only showed her how to use it. The officer grabbed his arm. That's enough, Reverend. He twisted free, shouting again. You think I'm the devil? The devil doesn't beg. The devil wins. The microphone screeched, feedback shrieking. Kane winced, clutching his ear. I whispered to Elijah, step back. Then, slowly, I walked to the pulpit he'd used like a throne, the same pulpit where he'd called himself savior. I placed the rosary on it. Blood, broken beads, bent cross, and spoke into the microphone. My son once died, I said quietly, and I thought a miracle saved him. But miracles don't take money. Miracles don't demand worship. They just breathe. The crowd fell silent. The police cuffed Kane behind me, his wrists clinking. He laughed, high, strained, desperate. You can't kill belief, sister. He spat. They'll still follow me. I turned, meeting his eyes. No, I said. They'll finally follow themselves. They led him down the aisle, past the faces he'd fooled. Some cursed him. Others just wept. The camera lights followed, documenting every step. As the doors slammed behind him, the echo rolled through the hall like thunder. I looked at the empty pulpit, at the rosary glinting faintly under the stage lights. Elijah stood at the edge, staring out at the crowd. He looked small again. Not the symbol Cain made him, but just a boy trying to breathe. He sank to his knees, hands covering his face. I knelt beside him, placed my hand on his shoulder. "It's done," I whispered. "We're free." He shook his head, voice muffled. He said the darkness was part of me. I brushed his hair back, the way I used to when he had fevers. "Then let's walk it into the light together." Hours later, after the crowd emptied and the cameras stopped, I sat alone on the stage. Police tape crossed the aisles. Reporters murmured outside the doors. The building smelled of wax and rain. The storm had started again, tapping against the stained glass. Elijah slept with his head on my lap, exhausted. I traced the line of his scar where the glass had once cut him, and whispered a prayer. Not a bargain, not a demand, just a thank you that he was breathing. The rosary lay beside us, sticky with blood. I didn't clean it. It had earned that red. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a candle still burned. The only one that hadn't gone out. Its flame bent in the draft, steady, stubborn. And for the first time in years, I felt warmth that didn't hurt. They said later that the recordings went viral, that people shared them across every platform, that dozens came forward, parents, former followers, with stories of the same manipulation, the same donations, the same bruises on the soul. Cain's ministry collapsed in days. He was charged with fraud, abuse, coercion, words too neat for the damage he'd done. Reporters called me the mother who exposed the preacher. I hated the title. I didn't want to be famous for surviving a miracle turned rotten. I just wanted my house quiet again. Elijah and I didn't go back to St. Mary's. We prayed at home, not to pictures, not to statues, but to silence. The good kind. The kind that listens back. Weeks later, I walked past the ruined hall. The posters were gone. The gold cross above the door had been removed, leaving a dark outline on the brick like a scar. In the gutter, I saw one of the flyers half soaked in rain. Elijah's face was still visible. The headline read, "The Boy Who Rose." I picked it up, folded it, and slipped it into my coat pocket. Not as a wound, but as proof. When I reached home, I hung the rosary by the window. The morning light caught on each bead, scattering red flecks across the wall. I stood there a long time, watching the colors move, and I thought, this is what resurrection really looks like. Not glory, not applause, just ordinary daylight refusing to die. Elijah came in from the porch holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You still believe in miracles, Mama?" he asked softly. I smiled. "Yes," I said, "but not the kind that need a microphone." He laughed. A real laugh, the first I'd heard in years. We sat together at the table, the same one where I'd once strung the rosary back together with a needle and my own blood. The thread had darkened, stiff with time. I left it that way. A reminder that sometimes, healing isn't about making things look new. It's about keeping the proof of where they broke. Later that evening, Elijah lit a single white candle in the kitchen window. "Why one?" I asked. He smiled. "Because we don't need fire to prove we're saved. Just light." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of church bells from miles away. I looked at the candle, then at the rosary, and felt the quiet settle into my bones. The devil never came with horns or smoke, I thought. He came in a tailored suit and a microphone, calling himself Deliverance. It's been 5 months since the night the lights went out in Cain's church. The news stations have stopped calling. The livestream links have drifted into the bottom of the internet. The world moved on. But inside my house, the air still carries the faint scent of candle wax and wet stone, the smell of everything that burned and was washed clean again. Elijah is away now, at a recovery center in Baton Rouge. They call it psychological rehabilitation. But I like to think of it as a place for souls learning to breathe again. He sends letters every Sunday. Short, careful lines written in his new, steady handwriting. "Mama, I dream of light that doesn't hurt my eyes anymore." The first time I read that, I pressed the paper to my chest and cried. Not because it was sad, but because it meant he was healing somewhere I couldn't control. I spend my days back in the workshop. The door still says Heaven's Touch Atelier, though now the sign is faded and smells of dust. When I reopened it, I made a rule for myself. I only restore saints who've lost their heads. The first piece that came in was a small statue of St. Lucy, eyes gone, neck cracked, her tiny plaster hands still clutching a lamp. It took me 2 weeks to reattach the head, smoothing the seam until it looked whole again. When I finished, I left a thin line unpainted around the scar. You can still see it if you look close. Perfection hides miracles. Scars prove them. The radio sits silent now. I don't need hymns to fill the space. The sound of the chisel against stone, the brush scraping along old paint, that's my prayer. Sometimes people bring me their broken icons, crosses missing arms, angels with chipped wings. I don't promise to make them new. I promise to make them true. On the far wall hangs the rosary, the same one that once cut my hands open. I cleaned the beads but left the dried blood dark in the thread. I framed it inside glass with a small brass plate beneath, broken once, blessed twice. In the afternoon sun, it glints faint red, and the reflection looks like a heartbeat pulsing through the room. Every day, people ask if I still believe, if I still pray. I tell them the truth. I don't beg anymore. I just talk to God straight, through the scars He let heal. Sometimes the words surprise even me. They sound calm. They sound final. One evening, while closing the shop, I found a package on the doorstep. No return address, just a small wooden box tied with string. Inside was a fragment of marble, the head of St. Michael, the very piece Elijah had buried in the plant pot months ago. Someone must have found it during the police cleanup and sent it back. I set it on the table, cleaned the soil from its hairline cracks, and pressed my thumb to its cold forehead. For a moment I could almost hear Elijah's voice. "Mama," he said, "fear is honest." I whispered back, "So is faith, baby. So is love." Then I placed the head next to the repaired body of the statue. Not attached, not yet. Some wounds need to stay visible a little longer. Nights are quiet here now. No chanting, no shouting, just the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint click of the rosary beads when the wind moves the frame. Sometimes I sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching moths crash against the glass, drawn to a light they can't quite touch. That's what faith feels like after everything. Not blindness, just gentle persistence. You move toward the light even when you know it burns. Elijah will come home next month. He writes that he wants to help in the workshop, to learn how to fix what looks beyond fixing. I told him I'd save a desk for him by the window. The town has already begun to whisper again. This time, kinder whispers. They call me the woman who mended saints. It makes me smile, because it's only half true. The real saint I'm mending is still learning to breathe somewhere down south, writing me letters about light. I close the shop every evening at 6. Before locking the door, I always look at the wall of finished pieces. Rows of saints once headless, now standing proud under a coat of new gold leaf. They look back at me as if they know the truth. Salvation isn't about being untouched. It's about being rebuilt. I switch off the light, and for a moment, the room glows with the last reflection from the framed rosary. A crimson spark dances across the glass, fades, returns. And in that small pulse of color, I hear the only prayer I still need. Thank you for giving me back what was stolen. It isn't triumph. It isn't peace. It's something quieter. The steady breathing of a life that survived its own miracle. A full year has passed since the night the microphones went silent. The seasons have turned, the wounds have cooled, and the town has stopped whispering when they see me at the market. The papers called it the Bowen Revelation. They said I destroyed a false prophet. But the truth is simpler. I just learned how to stop kneeling in the wrong direction. I bought an old brick building on River Street, once a butcher shop, now my Saints Reborn atelier. When the sunlight hits the windows, it paints the floor in colors stolen from old stained glass. Sapphire, crimson, gold. The first day I opened the door, the smell of dust and plaster felt almost holy. Women came slowly, one by one. Some were widows from Cain's congregation, some younger, their wrists still bruised from men who said love but meant possession. They brought statues wrapped in newspaper, Saint Mary without a face, Saint Anthony missing a hand, Saint Joan split clean down the middle. I told them what I tell everyone who walks through the door. We don't fix what's broken, we reveal what survived. We sand gently, paint patiently, glue slowly. Each woman works on her piece like it's a secret prayer. The room hums with quiet. The sound of chisels, brushes, and sometimes humming from an old gospel record spinning on the player. On the front wall hangs my framed rosary. The brass plate beneath it reads, "Broken once. Blessed twice. Every morning I touch the glass before unlocking the door." Not superstition. Reminder. Elijah is home now. He still attends therapy once a week, still wakes from dreams where water closes over him, but he's learning how to live in daylight again. He helps in the atelier, teaching younger students how to mix plaster. Sometimes, when the afternoon light catches his scar, I see it glimmer like silver thread. The kind you'd sew into a wound to remind it not to open again. He calls me boss lady now, just to make me laugh. When he leaves for the evening, he always turns the sign on the door to closed and says, "That means we're done saving saints for the day." I still keep his first letter from Baton Rouge framed above my desk. "Mama, I dream of light that doesn't hurt my eyes anymore." When I look at it, I remember every dark corner we walked through to get here. And I whisper back, "Me too." One rainy Tuesday, a woman knocked at the door after hours. She was in her 50s, soaked to the bone, clutching a small statue of the Virgin, whose head had been shattered clean off. "I heard you fix lost things," she said. "Only if they still want to be found," I replied. She smiled faintly and stepped inside. While I made her tea, she told me her husband used to preach under Cain's ministry, that after his arrest she'd hidden every symbol of faith in her house. Only this one statue had survived the purge, though without its head. "Can it be saved?" she asked. I ran my thumb along the broken edge. "It's not about saving," I said. "It's about letting it speak again." We spent hours side by side, gluing, sanding, painting. When we finished, the seam was still visible, a faint crack circling the neck like a halo turned inside out. She looked at it and whispered, "Beautiful." Before she left, she asked the same question they all ask eventually. "Do you still believe in miracles, Ms. Clarisse?" I smiled. "Of course I do. A miracle is what happens the moment you stop asking for one and start standing up." That summer, the town museum invited us to display our restored pieces. We lined the hall with saints, every one of them once fractured, now upright under warm light. Women stood beside their work, hands trembling not from fear but from ownership. Each statue had a small tag, the name of the artist, and one sentence about what it meant to her. Under mine it read, "She rebuilt what begged to be remembered." When the crowd left and the hall emptied, I turned off the lights one by one. The last glow rested on St. Lucy, the one with the thin, unpainted line at her neck. In the half-dark she looked alive, as if mid-breath. For a moment I imagined Cain's voice again, that slick baritone twisting truth into chains, and then I realized I couldn't recall the sound anymore. That, too, was a miracle. One evening, while Elijah was cleaning brushes, he said quietly, "Mama, do you ever miss praying like before? You know, asking for things." I thought about it. "Sometimes," I said. "Then I remember what asking cost me." He nodded. "You think God forgave us?" "I think God was waiting for us to forgive ourselves first." He smiled, then picked up the radio, the same one that once played Cain's sermons, and tuned it until static turned into an old hymn. The choir sang off-key, scratchy, through the speaker. It was perfect. We worked in silence after that, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, only full. On the anniversary of the arrest, I sat alone in the atelier after closing. The room smelled of clay and lemon oil. Rain tapped gently on the roof. I took out my old journal, the one I hadn't opened since Elijah's accident, and wrote a single line. "You prayed for a miracle. You became one." Then I tore out the page and slipped it behind the frame of the rosary, between glass and wood, where no one would see it but God. Not long ago, a local pastor came to visit. A good man. Humble, quiet. He asked if I'd ever consider returning to the choir. I told him maybe one day. He said, "The congregation still talks about you, Sister Bowen. They say your faith shook the devil himself." I laughed softly. "No," I said, "my fear did. Faith just waited for me to remember her name." He nodded, leaving behind a small bouquet of white lilies. I placed them under the rosary and whispered, "For what's gone, and for what stayed." Every Friday, I end class with the same words. When something breaks, don't rush to erase the crack. The crack is the proof that you touched the dark and walked out carrying light. Some of the younger women write it on their palms before they leave, afraid they'll forget. Others just hold my hand a moment longer. I can feel their pulse against mine. Quick, alive. And I think, this is what salvation sounds like. Tonight the atelier is empty. The tools are lined neatly on the bench, brushes soaking in jars. Elijah's laughter drifts from the porch where he's fixing the sign that swings in the wind. The sky is bruised purple. Thunder rumbles far away. I turn off the lamps one by one until only the rosary glows in the dark, catching the flash of lightning like a heartbeat. I sit beneath it, hands folded, not in prayer, just in peace. And for the first time in a long time, I realize I don't need to ask for anything. Not safety, not forgiveness, not proof. I have all three. I once begged God to save my son, and I thought the miracle was that he did. But the real miracle was learning how to save ourselves and still call it grace. The camera blinks red in the corner of the room, a small light pulsing like a heartbeat. Elijah set it up for me. He said, "You should tell it yourself, Mama. Not let reporters cut it down to sound bites." So here I am, sitting in my workshop, the walls behind me lined with saints that used to be broken. The light is warm, dust drifts through the air like lazy snow. On the wall above my head, the rosary glows faintly in its frame. The same one that's followed me through fire and silence. I take a deep breath. I never wanted to be a symbol, I say into the lens. I never wanted to fight a preacher or prove a miracle was fake. I just wanted my son to live. My hands rest on the table. The same table where I once stitched beads together with trembling fingers. You can still see the faint red stain where the thread cut through my skin. I used to think faith was about kneeling, I continue, about begging for something bigger to notice you. But now I know. Sometimes faith starts when you finally stand up. I look around the room as I speak. The saints watch quietly. They don't judge, they just exist. Heads glued, cracks visible, light catching every imperfection. They say time heals, I tell the camera. I don't believe that. Time just hands you the tools. You have to do the fixing yourself. I glance toward the door, where Elijah's shadow moves in the next room, humming softly. People ask me if I still believe in God, I say. I do. I just stopped believing. He only lives in churches. I lean forward, closer to the lens. My voice softens but steadies. If one day, the person preaching about God to your child is the same one stealing their soul, don't stay silent. Don't wait for heaven to strike lightning. Don't wait for proof. Stand up, even if your knees still bear the marks of all the times you knelt. The air hums with quiet. Outside, rain begins to fall, tapping gently on the roof. I hold up the rosary. The light glints off the glass, and for a second it looks alive again. This, I say, isn't a story about religion. It's about what happens when love gets hijacked by fear. When somebody uses the name of God to make you doubt your own worth. When silence becomes its own form of worship. I pause, letting the words breathe. If that's happening to you, or someone you love, say something. Share this story. Let it travel farther than his lies ever did. Because somewhere out there, another mother is kneeling right now, thinking surrender is the same as salvation. I lean back, exhale. The camera keeps rolling. I look down at my hands. The scars have faded but never disappeared. They remind me that flesh remembers what faith sometimes forgets. I don't tell this story because I'm brave, I say. I tell it because staying quiet almost killed the part of me that believed in anything good. And I won't let silence win again. The rain grows louder. I reach over and turn off the workshop light. Only the rosary shines now, red and soft like the last ember of a fire that refuses to die. People call me a survivor, I whisper. But what I really am is a believer. In second chances, in broken things finding shape, in the kind of grace that doesn't ask for applause. I look straight into the lens. My voice steadies one final time. Share this story. Maybe someone out there is still kneeling to the wrong man. Maybe they need to know faith can stand on its own 2 feet. I reach forward, fingertips brushing the camera, ready to turn it off. But before I do, I add quietly, my story ends here. But maybe, just maybe, this is the first time I've ever prayed with my own voice. The screen fades to black, the sound of rain stays, and then, only silence, honest and clean,